name is Peter Putney, and I wanted to do a video today responding to some statements that are made about Daniel 3:25 by Calvin George. These are some things that are being taught in our Spanish churches. This comes from an article on his website, Defending Corrupt Readings in the Reign of Valera 1960. And in this case, he's making the argument for the right rendering of Daniel 3:25, son of the gods, as opposed to son of God. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of go through this with you and try to refute some of the things he's saying. Like I said, these are things that are being taught in our Baptist and independent fundamental Baptist churches, especially in their Spanish ministries, and we got to stand up to it and confront error with the truth. So basically the verses that we're looking at here, the only verse really, Daniel 3:25, he answered and said, "Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like the Son of God." That's the rendering in our King James Bible that we have enjoyed for hundreds of years, and praise the Lord for it. And then, as we know, in modern Bibles like the NIV, it says, instead of saying the Son of God, it says the Son of the gods. This is actually the verse that first made me reject the 1960. I started out in working in Spanish using the 1960, and it was this verse, preaching from Daniel 3, where I said, okay, I've got to find a better option. And praise the Lord, I found the RVG. But anyways, Calvin George is defending this rendering and saying, hey, it's not really a big deal. And so let's take a look at what he has to say here. And just so you know, the reason he's defending is because in the Bible that he uses in Spanish and that is used in a lot of fundamental Baptist ministries, it says the same as the NIV says, Son of the gods. Okay, so what is he going to say to defend this reading and try to convince us King James independent fundamental Baptist churches to be okay with the rendering Son of the gods? Well, let's take a look here. So I'm going to go ahead and quote from his article. These statements are translated into English from Spanish using software because I don't see at this time he has an English version of his article. But let's go ahead and read what he says. Regarding Daniel 3:25, it's not a textual problem of differences between manuscripts in the original languages because they all say the same thing. And he's correct. That is true. This isn't a textual issue. This is a translation issue. He goes on to say that the issue is that the 1909 and 1960 versions of this verse was translated very literally, directly from the Aramaic, but in the King James Version, it was interpreted. All right, so this statement is missing a lot of context that makes it seem very cut and dry, like, oh, the 1960s literal and the King James is not. It's just interpreting. But it's not that simple. There's a lot of nuance here that you're missing, and after I explain it, you'll see what I mean. So there's two schools of thought about how to translate the Aramaic word for God here, whether to translate it in plural or in singular. Now, in Hebrew, the word for God, Elohim, is when it refers to God, it's always in plural, and it is translated singular into English and into most languages. And honestly, that's actually an argument used for the Trinity, for Christians defending the Trinity because of that fact. So in all languages, it's not always so cut and dry to translate singular and plural into other languages. The context is often very important as to what you should do. Now, there are some who say that Aramaic is completely different than Hebrew in that there's never a time where you would translate the plural God into singular in another language. And that seems to be the school of thought that Calvin George is siding with and kind of, presenting like they have the truth and that's how it is. This is the school of thought of NIV supporters and, modern textual critics, etc., who would say that, no, if it's in plural, it's always going to be translated into plural. However, there are many, many, many people that disagree with that school of thought. Now, there's another school of thought that has to be explained and presented. That includes the 54 King James translators, who are literally the best in the world. Nobody living today compares with any one of them, in my opinion. But not just the King James translators. I mean, for thousands of years, Bibles have been translating Daniel 3:25 as Son of God. And there is a very strong consensus amongst experts that disagree with the thought that it's never adequate or never correct to translate it into the singular, depending on the context. Now, many of these, there's just a couple of them. Let me just give you a couple examples here of modern people. Dr. Ken Mado, he makes this claim, telling us that it does not say, telling us that the Aramaic word may be translated gods or God, depending on the context and the usage. The New American Commentary, which is not a King James commentary, they use the NIV in it, very popular commentary. They say the same thing, that the word can be rendered as plural gods or as singular God, depending on what the context is. It's you can render it either way. And you can find commentary after commentary, article after article that explains this same principle. So there is not unanimous consensus, as Mr. George is kind of presenting, that the literal translation is always going to be, son of the gods. That's not necessarily correct. There are, depending on the context, just as in, as with Elohim, that you can translate this into the singular. And you can see this even from ancient times. Now, I am not a fan of the Greek Septuagint. If you've read my book, you know that. Mr. George and I have classed over this in other articles. So I'm not promoting the Septuagint, but the Septuagint is an example of an ancient translation in which they translate Daniel 3:25 as Son of God, singular. So it's not like it's a modern King James thing to have Son of God. This is a translation that has historical precedency for thousands of years. So, anyways, the point I'm making is that the Son of God is a very acceptable translation because that word can be based on the context. Another example, the original Reina 1569 Biblia de Olso in Spanish, it also says Son of God, translated as singular. And it wasn't up until the more modern Bibles that they changed it in Spanish to Son of the Gods. It historically was Son of God, going back to the original Reina and Valera translations. So that's the truth about this word. It can be translated either way, and what determines that is the context. And so you got to be careful with some of these statements. Well, think about this: half-truths are most dangerous kinds of lies because they're the most deceptive. And so a lot of times when Mr. George presents a half-truth, some of what he's saying is correct, but without the context, without the nuance of it, it ends up just kind of becoming a deceptive statement that's not really what the truth is. So it's not correct to say that the King James is just interpretive in the 1960s as literal. You have to look at the nuance of the argument, and the reality is the word. You have to pay attention to the context before translating it into the receptor language. So he continues on. I'll continue to read some of his statements in his article. I don't have a problem with the KJV's interpretation of Daniel 3:25 because it's a correct interpretation, even if it's not entirely literal. Again, the statement ends up not being completely illuminating to the issue with the nuances because of what I just explained, okay? But Mr. George is trying to play both sides, where he's trying to please both the King James crowd and the 1960 users, and he's trying to claim that both are right. One says Son of God, one says Son of the Gods, and they're both right. So that's kind of just what he's trying to do here. He goes on to say, those who criticize the King James Version often complain that it interprets something instead of translating literally. But in the case of the KJV's Daniel 3:25, they do the opposite. They complain about a literal translation in the King James Version and defend the fact that the KJV interpreted it. And once again, this statement means nothing when you understand the nuance of this particular issue. He's painting it like it's something else when he's not explaining the nuance and the context of why it was translated as singular instead of plural. So this statement to me absolutely means nothing. I'm not even going to try to refute that because it makes no sense when you consider the context of Daniel 3:25. If you look at Strong's Concordance in English, you'll see a keyword for Daniel 3:25 corresponds to the number 426, which translated not only as God, but also as gods on numerous occasions in the King James. And then he mentions Daniel 5:14 and says this is an example of Daniel's gods being referred to as gods plural, and therefore we shouldn't have a problem with Daniel 3:25 saying it. Okay, and I'll get to this in a second, but this is what's called a false equivalence, and I'll explain what that means in a second. He then says is that by the same logic, it should be considered. I'm sorry, as Daniel 3:25 appears in the 1909 and 1960 RV versions, the king did not immediately recognize the identity of the fourth man in the fire, reflecting the ambiguity of the original text. This is similar to the case of John 20:15 in the KJV, where Mary addressed Christ as Sir instead of Lord, as in the 1960, similar to gentleman in English. And then he goes on to say, by this same logic, it should not be considered incorrect for King Nebuchadnezzar to refer to the fourth man as in the fire as like a son of the gods in Daniel 3:25 in the 1909-1960 RV versions, since it is unlikely that the pagan king would have instantly recognized the identity of the fourth man in the fire. That's where we're going to disagree, and I'll explain that in a second. And then finally, he gives this asinine statement. Anyone who says that the RV 1960 is an error or corrupt in this passage is actually saying that the text is corrupt in the original language. Okay, so if you ever have a problem with the NIV's rendering of "son of the gods," you're just attacking the original Bible. This is completely egregious, and we'll come back to this in a moment. So, first claim that he makes that this is how we're supposed to translate it. We already saw that context does not support that claim. You have to look at the context whether to translate it singular or plural. This is verified by literally thousands of years of Bible translations doing the same thing. Secondly, he points to the word translated in plural in Daniel 5, and it's kind of like a gotcha moment. But it's like I said, context matters, and we're going to look at that. So what does the context support for Daniel 3:25? Does the context actually support going with the singular translation instead of the plural translation? And the answer is yes. That's why it's been done for thousands of years. Why is the context supporting the singular translation? A few reasons. Number one, Nebuchadnezzar knew who their God was. All right, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel had a long-standing history of being a witness for the Hebrew God Jehovah to King Nebuchadnezzar. You can go back into Daniel chapter 2, and you'll see him actually saying this. The king answered unto Daniel in Daniel 2 in 2:47, of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of lords. And a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. He says in Daniel 2:48, that the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. And so Nebuchadnezzar, literally his number one wise man, his number one counselor, you could say, his ruler, the chief of the governors. Daniel was his top guy, and I think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have been right up there as well as advisors for many years. These were the people that interpreted his dream. These were the people that explained to him about the God of Israel. Nebuchadnezzar knew who the God of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego was. In fact, when he saw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing, I guarantee you he knew why. I guarantee you he knew why, because he had many years of history working with these people from the time that Daniel interpreted his dream, and he said, yes, your God is the God of gods. He knew why they were standing, because they were not going to submit to his pagan gods, because they worshiped the true God, the God of Israel. Now, this is obvious in the story. You go to Daniel 3, and you're going to see this. The whole thing was a competition between the false gods of Nebuchadnezzar and the singular true God of the Hebrews. If you look at Daniel 3:17, they said, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So notice the context. Notice the competition that is here. It's our God, verse 17. He's going to deliver us out of your hand. All right, whether that be through death, and we're no longer in front of you, or whatever. God is going to deliver us from your hand, King. We trust in our God, whatever he decides to do. But if not, we're not going to serve your gods. Even if we die in that furnace, We're not going to serve your gods. So notice the contrast. It's our God versus your gods. This is a competition. So when Nebuchadnezzar looked and he saw, he saw who won. He saw them walking around alive. He knew that his gods lost and their God won. Now, another reason why I believe that it's very clear from the context that he saw that it should be translated singular is because Nebuchadnezzar saw a theophany, a literal pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. It's not strange to think that he would have recognized that Christ was the Son of God, singular Hebrew God, the one that just won the competition because they're alive. The one that he knew they worship, the one that he's known they've worshiped for years and years and years since his dream and all the times that they've been a witness to him of their God as their chief counselors, okay? So he sees a literal theophany. Now, it's clear whether you decide to go with Son of God or Son of God's translation, it's clear that the fourth person in the fire is not just some average dude walking around with them. This is a divine appearance. This is a heavenly person that he sees there. And if you look at other examples of Christ's appearing in the Old Testament as a pre-incarnate appearance, and even in the New Testament and a post-resurrection appearance, for example, you have the Lord appearing in Daniel chapter 10, or the Lord appearing in Revelations chapter 1, and there's many other examples in the Bible we could present. When people see the pre-incarnate or post-incarnate Christ, the resurrected Christ, those appearances, they fall down on their face. I mean, it's just, they're amazed and blown away at Christ and his glory. And so I don't think it's any stretch at all. I don't agree with what Mr. George says here in his article at all, that, he wouldn't have immediately recognized, the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. That is just, I don't think that that's the case at all. When you consider all of these facts, it is obvious that when he looked in there and he saw that fourth man, he saw that he lost, that his gods lost, and the God of Israel won, and he saw the glory of that fourth man in the fire, he knew exactly who that was. And so to put in that translation, when he looked at him, he said, that fourth one, he is like unto the Son of God. That is absolute correct translation. And like I said, for thousands of years, that has been recognized and that has been translated. So when the 1960 and the NIV come along and they say, no, let's change that to Son of the Gods, and they think they know more about translation than all of these other translators for all of these hundreds of years, I'm not convinced. I'm not going to just immediately say, oh, they're right, and this traditional rendering is wrong. No. So I really truly believe that this argument that he's making has no basis whatsoever. Now, he provides another example to try to convince us that, hey, it's okay to translate Daniel 3:25 as gods, since in Daniel 5:14, the same word is translated as gods in the King James Bible. So this is what's called a false equivalence. A false equivalence is a logical fallacy where you're comparing two things that kind of might on the surface seem similar, but when you actually look down into it, they're not similar at all. And that's what this is, okay? So the verse that he brings up is Daniel 5:14, where he says, I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. So it says the spirit of the gods. And he says, well, they translated it spirit of the gods here, referring to, obviously Daniel didn't have the spirit of the gods, he had the spirit of God. So why would we have a problem with him translating it in Daniel 3:25? Well, this is not the same. This is a false equivalence. And the reasons why are as follows, okay? This is a completely different king. This king did not even know Daniel. This is obvious from the text. He's not looking at a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ in the fire. There's no competition going on between the fake pagan gods and the Hebrew God to see who's going to win. There's no history here of knowing who the Hebrew God even is. This man probably had never even heard of Daniel's God. It's not remotely the same thing. And so the King James translators, recognizing all of these facts, they correctly translated it, spirit of the gods, because that's the accurate translation, bringing it into the receptor language. Now, you got to be careful of logical fallacies. Mr. George does this often in his arguments. He'll present a false equivalency. That's one of his favorite logical fallacies to use. And you got to watch out for it, or it'll trip you up, and he'll get you on some of these arguments like that. You have to watch out for the false equivalence arguments. Okay, so in conclusion, the King James Version and other versions that agree with it and put Son of God, they did get it right. Even though the word can be translated plural or singular, depending on the context, they correctly translated it according to the context, and that is why it is correct when to put Son of God. The RV 1960, ignoring the context, ignoring all of the historical precedent of Reina Valera Bibles going back to the original, they decided to put, like the 1909, Son of the Gods, following the modern translations, and it's an incorrect rendering, okay? It's just an incorrect rendering. And so the defense that Mr. George is presenting here, trying to convince us, independent, Baptist, fundamental, King James churches, that we should be okay with Son of the Gods, I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced. And I truly do believe that his statement there at the end, where he says that if we have a problem with the NIV Son of the Gods rendering, or the 1960 Son of the Gods rendering, then we actually just have a problem with the Bible itself, with the underlying text. I'm sorry, but that is a ridiculous statement. That's asinine, and that is not even remotely true. So that's my defense, Daniel 3:25. I'm going to stick with my King James Bible. I'm going to stick with the RVG in Spanish, and I hope that you will as well. Hope you learned something. Stand up for the Word of God. Don't be bullied by these people that want to get you to accept corruption, textual corruption, based on the modern version. So God bless you all. You have a great day.